This week at the Kuna School District board meeting, trustees approved their master contract for teachers and staff for next year, the 2023-2024 school year. And it's coming up quickly. And most, if not all, districts around the state have to have such things finalized by the end of this month. Then they can set about hiring if they need to. Teacher salaries were a major priority for Governor Little this year.
We are also going to grow the salaries of all teachers, including the most experienced ones, to ensure students have the classroom support they need. What does this mean for the average teacher? It means a $6,300 pay raise. When we show teachers we support them, we're showing families their child education is our priority.
And then the applause follows that. But that actual number came in at $6,359 and is part of the $1.3 billion teacher salary budget, which included $145 million in pay raises. It was approved by the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee and both chambers of the legislature. In fact, only two lawmakers voted against it. That'd be Republican Senators Brian Lenny from Nampa and Dan Foreman from Moscow. But did every teacher in every school district get a $6,300 a year bump in pay? Well, no. That's because that money is given to each individual district, and they decide how it's divvied up, depending on what else they have to pay for. And that varies around the state. Idaho Ed News looked into this a little last week, and they found Coeur d'Alene teachers, they're going to be getting all of that $6,359. Pocatello, though, only $5,000. West Ada, $4,965. So what about Kuna? Well, there's a lot to consider when it comes to how school districts decide to spend state money and how much they get to spend.
And so when you look at the state funding formula and the money they send to us dedicated to teacher salaries, there are some important things to know. One, they don't fund every teacher who's hired in Idaho.
Like, how does that relate to the Kuna School District? Like, how many teachers are not being funded by the state?
We hire 354 teachers. Of those, the state provides salary funding for 293. So there are 61 that we don't receive state salary funding for. So we have to look at other sources, our discretionary money. In the past, we've used our supplemental levy. Other districts use supplemental levy, but we have to use other resources to pay those teachers. You know, we had some questions after we covered this. They're like, why do you have so many over what the state provides? And it really is student needs. And that's what communities are doing. They're making decisions that our kids need more teachers or more counselors or more nurses, and the state just doesn't provide all the funding for it. It's been a long-standing gap.
The other thing that changed this year is the way that schools are being funded, attendance versus enrollment.
Yeah. And so you think about enrollment, 100% of the kids. Attendance is about 95% of the kids. And so that formula that decides how many teachers the state will fund, it's now at that 95%. So that creates a wider gap of teachers then that we either would cut or we would continue to hire but use other money to pay for those positions.
So based on those changes from enrollment to attendance, based on the fact that Kuna District hires and employs 61 more teachers than the state pays for, what are those teacher salaries, the pay increase is going to look like?
One of their interests was to make sure that every teacher got at least $3,550. But the range actually goes from $3,550 to as high as $7,285 for a raise. The average range for a teacher is going to be about 7%.
So there you go. For those getting the upper end of that pay raise spectrum into the $7,000 range, that's based on their education and standing within the district. You heard Allison say to cover the gap of those 61 credentialed staff members, they have to dip into their discretionary spending bucket or find other ways, like asking residents to approve bonds and levies, something Kuna tried to do back in March. But the 14th largest school district in the state, and one of the fastest growing, by the way, with only 2 high schools, they could not get the 2/3 majority for their $111.4 million bond to pass, which is a big reason they will continue to deal with overcrowding from elementary to high school. And their teachers will only see a base increase in pay, nearly half of what they were promised by the governor.